All right, so we are in the 2019 VW Arteon. This is a 2-liter turbo, 8-speed automatic 4-motion vehicle. It has 268 horsepower, which is pretty solid out of that 2-liter. Very similar to almost the same engine that my Golf R has. The 8-speed transmission is a traditional automatic transmission, not the DSG, and of course it is 4-motion. This one in particular is the R line and retails for $48,000, give or take. It's about as loaded up as you can get one. Oh, and a big thanks to Leaf VW for letting me borrow this car so I can do the review for you guys. Now, to me, this is a direct replacement for the Passat CC. You guys remember that Sportback CC from a couple years ago? Very cool car, very much a derivative of the Passat. And to me, this is basically the same kind of idea. This is a halo car, so there's not going to be a million of them out there and a million of them sold. It's going to be a lower production number. And it's a cool looking car. So the first time I saw this car was back in 2018 at European Experience, and that one was wrapped in this bright yellowy green wrap. Looked real cool. It was at the VW booth. The one we got today is gray, so a little less standouty, but still a really cool looking car. I really dig the body lines, especially from the back corner, that left or right rear corner. That curve over the quarter panel looks really, really cool. The front end is pretty different too. In fact, we're gonna start to see this type of styling, I think, really going forward as Volkswagen's kind of aesthetic look that they tend to have with their cars. Now, VW calls this a Fastback. You could call it a Sportback. One of my favorite things about this car, and something that I always wish the CC had, was a hatch more like a wagon or a hatchback is gonna have. Very much like the A7, very much like the A5 Sportback. I think the CC should have had that all along. The one negative to this roof line and this back end body line that comes with this car though, is there is a little bit of limited headroom in the rear seats. Now, I'm not a super tall dude, so for me, it's not gonna be a big deal. Plus, I'm usually the one behind the wheel anyway. If you're 6'4" and sitting back there, you may have to duck your head down a little bit. One of the other semi-negative, it's not bad, things about this body line is that it does give you a little bit reduced visibility out of the back. Now, while you're driving, it's not that big a deal, and I've never been in a situation while driving forward where I thought, you know, looking in my rearview mirror, that would be an issue. While you're parking or doing, you know, tight maneuvering like in parking lots, it's not an issue at all because this one is equipped with that really cool camera setup where you can see a 360 view overhead of what you're doing. In fact, that car saved me and a couple other dudes while we were going to lunch from getting whacked. There was a woman backing up, not even looking. I glanced down at that overhead view, saw something coming into frame, nailed on the horn, and of course she stopped maybe 3 inches from this passenger front door. I really dig the look. I like the feel inside the car. It feels very much like a Volkswagen, like a really sporty Highline Passat. This all across the dash vent system is very much like the 2020 Passat is. And I think that's a really cool look. I like the analog clock. I know most people don't care about that. And you know, if it didn't have it, it wouldn't be that big of a deal anyway. But I like it. I think that brings a little bit of elegance, I guess, to the vehicle. All right, got my coffee, time to get back to this review. One thing I do love about this car is the fold-up mirrors. That is something we will definitely be adding to the Golf R at some point. So like I mentioned, this is about as loaded up as it's gonna get for these cars. Heated seats, heated steering wheel, which you guys know is one of my favorite things. Cooled seats or ventilated seats, because they can't technically call them cooled seats, which I have on right now. From a driving and performance standpoint, I like the car. I think it handles pretty well. Part of me always has to temper these things that I say with, dude, it's not your R32. Dude, it's not a Golf R. It is a 4-door sedan. I was looking for a high-performance 4-door sedan. I would be looking at an S5, an RS5, an S4, an RS4, something like that, not an Arteon. So I always have to temper that need and desire really for more horsepower, more performance, stiffer suspension with that's not what this car is. That's not what it was built for. This car also has auto start stop, which I will deactivate. I think it's great. It's not the thing for me though. There are a ton of different settings you can change in the menus. You have an eco mode, a comfort mode, normal, and sport mode. You can even go in the custom mode and push the sport suspension for the dynamic chassis control beyond sport, so it'll stiffen it up even a little bit more, which is actually something the R doesn't have, so I think that's super cool. All in all, I think it does a pretty good job. And what I mean by that is I'm thinking of this car as a performance Passat, not necessarily something to compete with the A or S5 or the S6 or something like that. I'm thinking of it as a high performance Passat. It looks cool. It has 268 horsepower. It has an 8-speed transmission, so you can still get good fun in those lower speeds. And on the highway, it's in 8th gear. You can cruise and get pretty good fuel economy. I think the 4Motion teetered right on 30 miles per gallon. On the highway, it could be a couple more or a couple less. The steering feels good and solid. Right now, I have it in sport mode. In comfort mode, it does soften up the suspension a little bit, which I think is nice. You know, I love that performance. I love that stiff suspension and tight steering, but I don't necessarily need that all the time. I don't need that while I'm on a 6-hour road trip. So it's nice to be able, with dynamic chassis control, to flip that back and forth depending on your actual desire for what you want your car to do. Now, if I were taking this car out to the mountains, it's a big car. It's a heavy car. I think the curb weight is 3,850 pounds, give or take. So it's a pretty big, heavy car. I'm not going to be slinging it around the corners at the tail of the dragon like would something like the R32. So we always have to keep that in mind when we're comparing across the VW brand. Now, as you guys know, I'm a Volkswagen dude. I spent, 13, 14, whatever years as a VW technician. Everything seems to be as serviceable as it is on every other car. Nothing unique about this car from a service standpoint, other than one thing I did notice, I would really not want to do a rotate and balance on these wheels. The way that the wheels are designed, there's very narrow gaps in it, which makes it hard to get your hand in there to pick that tire and wheel assembly up. Something that is so cool and is exclusive, at least at this point on the Arteon in the VW line, is the pedestrian protection hood. So the front of the car, the hood, the body lines of the hood are very unique to the Arteon. It's different, right? When we open up the hood, we notice we have that center latch release on the body of the car, not on the hood, which is common on the newest generation. We have 2 hood struts. And if you look back by where the hinges for the hood are, we'll see airbag connectors. The bright yellow connectors are airbag connectors. That's because there's pyrotechnics right at the hinges. What this car is designed to do is to protect pedestrians. So in the event of you hitting someone, what's going to happen is that hood is actually going to shift back. And that's designed to slow that impact down so that even though it may not tickle if you were to hit someone, they're not going to get rammed into the engine, is the way that Volkswagen describes it in their training material. So it's pretty cool. It pops up and back kind of like that. Those kind of things in the US we don't really focus on. But I guess this is a much more common thing in European countries. So pretty cool bit of technology. This car also has digital cockpit, which is basically the same thing the Golf R has. Very cool feature. I like the steering wheel. I actually like this steering wheel, I think maybe a little bit more than the Golf R. The airbag setup is pretty neat. This has an incredible sound system with a subwoofer. It's dyno audio, so it's the top level sound system. Sounds really, really solid. Of course, it has all the driver assist, adaptive cruise control, lane departure, all the parking stuff that I already talked about. So again, loaded up on the R-Line. And of course, the R-Line always has different wheels, different badging, usually different aero package and stuff, which I think is pretty darn cool. Sunroof, of course. I think it's gonna do okay for the right customer. Again, this is a halo car for Volkswagen, so it's not like they're expecting to sell this car like they do the Jetta. There are a handful of things that I do not love about this car. Some of them are nitpicky. Some are, I think, just reasonable. One of the kind of nitpicky things that I don't like is there's a USB port right here in the center console facing straight up. Now, this makes it very easy to plug the USB cable into, which is something like on my Golf is a pain in the butt. However, then you have a cable sticking up right out of the center of your center console, and I never like things that get plugged in straight down. The reason is that tends to be a collector of debris, whether it's something like coffee or dust or lint, whatever it is, that stuff always tends to collect there. So I worry about longevity with that type of setup. While driving, there was one instance under pretty aggressive acceleration that I did get a couple of awkward shifts. I could never duplicate it again, so it could have just been a pure happenstance that I experienced it. If I were able to duplicate it multiple times, it would be a much more of a big deal to me, but a one-time occurrence I don't generally worry too terribly much about. The visibility thing that I mentioned earlier could be an issue for some people. If your mirrors are adjusted right, it's not going to be that much of a problem. And again, with all the parking aid that the car has and the 360 overhead view, you won't really have an issue if you're utilizing the features that the vehicle comes with, as long as it comes with them. I don't think all of them actually have all the parking set up in the 360 overhead view. I think I've said this in every car review that I've ever done. I want more horsepower. I'll say that probably, I think the Dodge Hellcat's the only car I've ever said, this is a good amount of horsepower. You know, if this were something that we were looking at 350 horsepower or like the RS5, 440 horsepower, something like that, I'd be all in. But again, I have to temper that with, it's not a Golf R, it's not the performance sedan like a high-end Audi. It is essentially, to me anyway, a performance Passat. Going back to the transmission a little bit, this car does have paddle shifters, which I think are cool. I like paddle shifters a lot. I am, however, a bit disappointed in how they function. The paddle shifters function almost exactly the same way the car does in sport mode. So if we tap the shifter back and put it in sport mode, it's gonna hold our RPM a little bit longer before shifting. Well, if we put it in manual mode and control with the paddles, it will shift at the exact same point as it would in sport mode. So I'm a little disappointed in that. The car also has those, fake exhaust tips, which I actually think is good because it means you're cleaning them a lot less. In addition to that, it also has flaps in the muffler. So on things like coast or 1,000 to, I think it was 2,700 RPM, the flaps are closed. Under heavy acceleration, higher RPM, those flaps open so you can get more airflow and you get a little bit better exhaust note. I like that better than the Soundmaker box that the Golf R has. So all in all, I think it's a pretty cool car. I think the price point's gonna price a lot of people out of it. And another thing to compare it to is the Passat. You get so much car for the money that it's gonna be hard for a lot of people to justify spending $15,000 more for a bit more horsepower, a cooler looking car, maybe featured up a little bit more, but ultimately it's about the same size. The trunk space, by the way, is great. Having that hatch is fantastic. I love that it is basically a hatchback. I have 6 cars, 5 of them are hatchbacks, so you guys know me, I'm a hatchback dude. It's been a fun car to have for a couple of days and cruise around. Again, it looks so good. I think it looks way better in person than all the pictures do and all the renderings do, and probably this video does. So if you get a chance, swing by your local VW dealership and check it out. As always, questions or comments, drop them down below. If you like the video, hit that thumbs up button. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.